Hey guys, welcome to my channel. This is Jay from Coding with Jaybird, where I upload weekly tutorials to help build your confidence in coding. Today we're going to learn about form events. Let's start coding, shall we? Here I have a form events project that I've opened in VS Code, and you can see I have a form-events.html file which is linked to a main.js and a styles.css. In the form-events, I have a form just after the main tag here, which has an ID of my form. Inside of it, I have a few input fields, one for the first name, one for the last name. I have an option selector field here. And lastly, we have a submit button. Let's practice some form events in our main.js. I'll talk a little bit about focus, blur, change, and submit. Let's start with the onFocus event. The onFocus event occurs when an element gets focus. So the onFocus event is most often used with input, select, and anchor tags. And the onFocus event, it's the opposite of the onBlur event, which we're going to cover next. So the way the onFocus event works is, if I select a field, like let's say I select this first name field, once I enter that, it triggers an onFocus event. Let's start with the onFocus event. And I'll demonstrate that by selecting this first input field. And what I want to see happen is when a user enters this field, so when they click inside this field, the onFocus event will fire. So I'll start by targeting that input field, get element by ID, and the ID for that field is fname for the first name, dot onFocus. And we'll set that equal to some function. And this function will simply change the background color of this input field to lavender. So again, I'm going to select that input field and change its style for the background color equal to lavender. So upon saving this, when I click inside this field, as you can see, it changes the background color to lavender. Perfect, it works really well. As you can see, it's redundant to write the get element by ID twice for the same ID. So let's try to do something a little different when we get to the next form event, which is the onBlur event. So the onBlur event is most often used with form validation code, such as when a user leaves a form field. So let's say I were to fill out my first name and then I enter the second field for the last name, but I forget to type something and I move on to the next selector, which is my drop-down menu here. At that point, I can have this field light up just to alert the user that, hey, you forgot to fill out this field. And that's what's called an onBlur event. So let's practice that. I'll start by targeting that input field, which has an ID of lname. So let last name field equal document.get element by ID, and we'll set this to last name. We can attach an onBlur event to this last name field variable that we've just created, similar to what we've done above with the onFocus, simply by saying last name field dot onBlur equals some function, and then we can define the function here. However, I'm going to show you a different method. So let's comment that one out. And ideally, we want to use the add event listener. So again, we'll target last name field dot add event listener. And in here, we'll attach it to the blur event. Now that's important. It's called blur, not onBlur. So when we have the add event listeners, we remove the keyword on from before the event name. So here we're listening for the event blur, and we want to run some functions. So I'm just going to create a function called highlight input. We haven't made the function yet, but we can define that further down. Let's create this function with the function keyword highlight input. And for this, all I want to do is I want this field to light up with the color red. So I'll say last name field dot style dot border equals 1 pixel solid red. So what I want to see happen is once I enter this field and then I step away from this field, it should highlight red, which it does. Perfect. Next, I want to talk about the onChange event. The onChange event occurs when the value of an element has been changed. Now, this is great for radio buttons, checkboxes, drop-down select menus, such as this one here. So the onChange event that I'm going to try to create here is that when a user selects one of these items from the drop-down menu, an alert message will pop up in the browser alerting the user that they've selected a particular option. Now I want to target this input tag. So what I want to look for is this select tag, which has an ID of course. And back in our main.js, I'm going to create a variable called course selection, and this variable is going to target document.getElement by ID, the course ID. And what I want to do is I want to say course selection dot onChange equals function, and here I can define some alert method. So I'll say alert that's going to let the user know, or the end user who's looking in the browser know, that you've selected this particular selection. So I can say you selected, and using concatenation I can add that to the value that's stored in that input field. So course selection dot value. And when I save this, everything here reloads, and when I select, let's say JavaScript, we get an alert saying you selected JavaScript. Okay, perfect. So that works really well. Another way to write this would be to say course selection dot add event listener. And in the add event listener, we would pass in change, once again, not on change, but simply the change event, and then some function would follow. And again, I'm going to comment this out since that's redundant at this point. And lastly, I want to talk a little bit about the Onsubmit event. Now, the Onsubmit event occurs when a form has been submitted. So I've given this form an ID of my form, as you can see here. So I want to start by targeting that form. So we'll say let submit form equal document dot get element by ID, my form, and then I'm going to attach an add event listener that's going to listen for the submit event. So we'll say submit form dot add event listener, and in here I want to listen for the submit event. And now all I have to do is pass in some function that's going to run once the submit event has fired. So I think to keep things neat and clean, I'll just add another alert message here saying that the form has been submitted. So let's simply type alert, the form has been submitted. Let's check to make sure that everything works. Now when I click inside this first name input field, it changes to lavender. When I enter this last name field and then step out of it, the onBlur event fires, and you can see that I've got the red border. When I select an HTML from this drop-down option, you can see I get my alert. And lastly, let's see if submit works. When I click on submit, it says the form has been submitted. Excellent. So it looks like everything works really well. Now lastly, I want to rewrite this in a different format. We could also write this as submit form.onSubmit equals some function, and then you'd have some function definition inside that, which of course I'll comment out since it's redundant. That's it for today's video on form events. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. If you have, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button so I can continue to make more amazing coding videos for you in the weeks to come. Until next week, keep on coding.